I suppose the other things, though, is that the Technology Strategy Board, they're really interested in groundbreaking technical projects, which we were able to get in there and do this because it was relatively new. I think if we went back to them now, they wouldn't be interested. So there is a case of having to really think about what you're doing quite innovatively and then hoping that it can fit some of their criteria. I think one of the other challenges with them is that they are used to dealing with academics and people who are very good at writing bids and applications. So you don't get much space on the forms, but you have to be very precise, and it can be quite a difficult process to get money out of them. The other area we've explored a lot over the last couple of years is around telehealth and telemedicine, working with the NHS in Cumbria and the Department of Health as part of their Social Enterprise Pathfinder project. The idea here is that you get a screen, that's the screen that sits in Alston Hospital. There's another one in Penrith Hospital, and you can actually make video calls between those so clinicians can check out on people remotely. Also, we're going to talk a bit more about the telehealth side of it as well. This is, I think, again, this is a sort of potential route when you've got good links with the community, the hospital, the GP surgery like we have, then it gives you the opportunity to sort of get involved in these sorts of projects. It's not, doesn't, you know, it's quite distant in some respects from the whole sort of broadband and the fibre side of it. But it's the sort of thing which gets mentioned a hell of a lot when you're out there listening to people saying, how are we going to pay for broadband to get into these rural areas? And one of the things we've done is actually go out there and actually try and make it work and sit down with the NHS. But again, it's been quite a long process of negotiating with them, going backwards and forwards, getting knocked back, trying to find different ways to work with people in the NHS who do want to make it happen. I think in the future, though, there will be more opportunities to get into this, because the sorts of network, the sorts of requirements that people will have for telehealth monitoring at home will need higher bandwidth connections which are more reliable than the sort of existing broadband connections, which can be quite flaky in a lot of parts of Cumbria. So looking at future funding opportunities, Broadband Delivery UK, we've touched on them a bit. They are focusing on rural areas, although it will be going through local authorities. So for those of you here from Cumbria, I think Cumbria County Council are going to be the key in terms of how that all works. Alan Cook, who's the new project director, he was here this morning. He probably saw this bit on the programme, so he's decided to head off so he doesn't get any questions. But you should, if you are interested in this, contact him or Lorraine Smythe, who's managing the sort of community engagement side. I know in Northumberland, Steve Ravel at the County Council is taking a lead on that, and Durham it's Phil Jackman. So there are people across the region who are working on this, and I think the key thing is if you've got projects, is to get them into those bids as they go in, or get them into those operational plans. BDUK have said that they don't want to cut across community activity because they see this as being hugely important in terms of actually getting services out to places, and it does tie in with the whole big society agenda that the government is pushing as well.
What are they funding there? What sort of, they fund capital, or they fund...
Just capital. They won't fund any sort of project management or support, and that is proven to be a problem for some of the county councils that are coming in, like Cumbria. No.
Are you going for some like BDUK funding?
Don't know. I mean, we'll look around when they produce the tender documents. We'll see if there's any partners around that we can work with. Depends, it all depends how it's going to be structured. I mean, we hope that it will be structured to give communities the chance to bid in themselves, so they can come up with their own local solutions. In which case, we'd see that there'd be a role supporting communities around the county doing that sort of thing. Just whizzing through these other funding sources, you've got ERDF, which is another European fund. There's supposed to be about 50 million in the northwest region allocated to that. Don't ask me how you get hold of it. I think it's There are various people mulling over that at the moment. The 7th Framework Programme from the European Union, that is, again, is focusing on things like broadband, how you get it out to rural areas, new types of services and applications. Although I would say it is quite a complex thing to get into, but you can actually join in other projects, other partnerships that are going in, and go on their coattails. It's a lot easier to do it that way. That's the way we've tapped into some of this funding in the past. I suppose the key as well in the future is going to be more partnerships with the private sector players who want to come in and try and deliver things. That's what we're doing at the moment, talking to some of these private sector organisations that recognise they have to do a bit more, step outside what they've normally done in the past, which is just enter into a contract. They have to come up with slightly different ways of working. And finally, there's social investment bonds, which is another new area. Has anyone heard of those? No? Basically, this is where people will put money into a bond which is sold to them by local authority or private sector organisation to deliver social benefits a few years down the line. And at the end of that time, if you're, say it's a local authority putting money into a drug rehabilitation centre, they will pay out if so many people have stayed off drugs at the end of that period. So that's where you get your return. There's a series of workshops coming up over through March. If you do a Google search on it, there's one in Glasgow, one in Birmingham, one in London. But it's well worth looking at, because I think this will be another role that we could actually see money coming into rural areas to pay for some of these networks. I suppose in conclusion, the key thing is really there's several different funders out there that can do things, but it ties in with how you structure your organisation, what you actually want to achieve, where you actually want to do things. If you just want to be a utility provider without doing any services, then that's really one set of funding. If you want to be very close to the community and providing all sorts of things like telehealth, community websites, then there's different sources of funding you can tap into again. And I suppose we do lots of things which gives us lots of scope to try and tap into different sources of finance. But as you see, it takes a lot of work and there's not many of us. So it really depends what you think is best for your group, your community, how you want to pursue it. I think as well, what we found is that we have to think laterally, and it may, we've had unsuccessful bids that get knocked back, but we can then use some of that data again in the future for doing other things. And the time we've actually spent developing the thinking around that can be useful. I think it's seldom that you actually sort of, by the end of a project, you sort of put that information aside and think, well, I'm never going to use that again. There are always future spin-offs for it. So it's always worth doing a bit of investigation and having that information to draw on for the future. Okay, thanks very much. Are there any questions?
Just roughly, how profitable is Cybermoor at the moment?
We don't make any surplus that we make is reinvested back into the network. So we don't try and get to the end of the year and make a profit. With Cybermoor Networks Limited, because we're asking people to invest money in it, some of them will be doing that for reasons that they will want to generate a rate of return. We envisage that we're targeting making around between 3 and 6% a year in a return for people, which is better than they get in the bank.